player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Voldiskke Esper and Vision card analysis. Brand new, I guess, dragon-oriented card, and Esper added to the game. I am very confused where the source of this name comes from, though. From what I can tell, this is not a Final Fantasy-related dragon. Even just Googling, like, Voldiskke translation to see if it translates something to another language, I can't find anything that makes any kind of sense. So I'm very intrigued where the lore of this comes from, but that's just a personal thought. That aside, obviously we want to look at whether or not it's good, regardless of where the source of where this dragon actually came from. And not for nothing, I don't even think we've seen dragons actually in War of the Visions. So yeah, I am exceptionally confused on everything lore related about this, but regardless of that complete tangent, we're going to go over both the Esper and the Vision card today to get some considerations on whether it's good or not, whether or not it's right for your account, a whole bunch of those topics. And so now we're going to look at the Esper first off, because to me, this is the strongest thing about this pull. So the new Esper, stat-wise, comes in at 17 agility, absolutely, very fast considering where most Espers tend to land at. For the status ailment, which I do look at this more commonly than ever now, it is 25% to slow. See that a little bit, obviously more for, let's say, Winter Wrath in terms of more recent units, but theoretically Addison, Summer Jaden are also some good candidates that use that pretty frequently. So this is 25% that you can stack with a Trust Stone passive to get to a 50% level that can kind of help against those high limit break oriented slow effects. But other than that, this is 115 attack, so obviously more of an attack oriented Esper from a physical damage perspective. The other stats, pretty average overall. And we look at the elements, this is pretty standard too, considering it's a lightning type Esper. It's strong against water and 10% weak to earth. And then the actual ability itself, this is really just a small asterisk consideration because you don't normally see this used in auto PvP. This is more for, I would think, like min-maxing guild raid stuff. It's water killer, it's a 200% mod. It's a 50% lightning imperil. But that 50% is really what most Espers have anyway, so this isn't necessarily an enormous upgrade from an ability perspective either, but that's just the stats. Really the most important thing is the board, right? And there's a lot of good things here on the board. Lightning attack 25 for those lightning units. There's earth resistance of 15%, which can get this to a net 5% positive. You have some other modifiers here for water killer slash attack. But really just skipping ahead here. Oh god, that didn't come out right. There we go, that's a little better. Really the best things about here is the 35% reaction block and the 10% reduction of all magical damage received. That's really the big thing here with the upside of the 15% magic resistance as well. So this is most definitely an anti-magic oriented Esper. And if I'm building out the board here, so let's say call it my favorite board if you will, these nodes are focusing that magical reduction, the reaction block, the magic res. You actually still have enough left over that you can go for the 7% attack and most of the slash modifiers here on the bottom. Then you get to that 10% extra slash res. It's 15% magic res. Overall, this is definitely the sweet spot for the board, because if you don't go this way, if you instead go for, let's say, the more offensive oriented, which we'll look at here, filling out all the lightning attack, the water killer, the slash attack, yeah, you get some pretty hefty mods here in terms of output, but here's the unfortunate downside, if you will, it's that it shares the exact same modifiers as Master Curl, Aegeon, and Scorpion Sentinel. All three of those Espers can also achieve these same exact modifiers in filling up their board. So in terms of like maxing the damage output, I don't really think this Esper is made for that. It doesn't really offer an advantage that the other ones can't from a Lightning Esper perspective, but it's really the anti-magic perspective that has a very, very strong presence and motivation for using. Now, from the Vision card side of things, we're going to look at, the equipment types. It's Grtswrd, it's Fist, and it's Sword Knight. Exceptionally important to always remember those three types. We'll keep reiterating that. It is not a hollow Vision card, just because we are getting it later than initially was on JP, so that's kind of a nice thing in terms of spend to max that card. But it's also a permanent pool Esper and Vision card, also very important. We're going to circle back on that in the final considerations. But when we look at this stat-wise, pretty mundane from the regular stats on an HP and an attack perspective. 3 agility, certainly nice. When you look at the unit-oriented effects, it's 15 accuracy and 5 unit res, no matter who you put that on. When you put it on lightning units in particular, that unit will get 10 lightning attack and 10% magic resistance as well. And then for the party effect for these three types, the Grtswrd, Fist, and Sword Knight, they're going to get slash attack 42, reaction block 32, and critical damage of 25. Now, without a whole bunch of judgments yet, let's talk through my noteworthy thoughts just now that we know the stats and whatnot. So for me, number one, it's an easy comparison to the Sephiroth Vision card that was released. Now, obviously, it's a completely different set of characters, literally completely no overlap at all. So the analysis is a little bit different just based upon who you can put it on. But when you think about when you made these teams, was there ever really a time where you thought to yourself, man, the Sephiroth Vision card, I need this for this team to be good? Probably not. Most of the top end teams, most of the really competitive teams didn't rely on this vision card to make those teams good. But strictly speaking, the 42 slash attack was relatively unimpactful to the majority of these slash oriented units, which we're looking at Sephiroth in particular. So obviously it's like the perfect vision card for him. He's still really, really good even without this vision card. It's not a huge overall impact. So for me, when I talk about the impact of the, I'll call it the Heindler Dragon vision card, I'm going to use this as my baseline for expectations that it's probably going to have a similar effect, that it's nice, but it's not amazing. And to me, it's not innately a good candidate as a main slot vision card because it does not have one of the primary attributes that you look for in terms of AoE res, unit res, or agility. Now, reaction block is a competitive choice for a main slot percent, but it doesn't lose a whole ton when you drop into the sub slot, so that's kind of the argument as to why not. But the Melnia Vision card, which is part of the Knight subgroup, does change this consideration a little bit because the Melnia Vision card has both agility and unit res on it. We're going to talk through this logic in a second. So there actually is a case why you may use this as a main slot vision card, but really in the Sword Knight category. But there's also a future unit res vision card coming with slash attack already on it. So if you're talking about not combining stats on the main slot here, that future unit res vision card obviously takes priority that you're already going to have slash attack on the main slot. That basically makes this by default a sub-slot vision card. So that already kind of nerfs the impact by the fact that it'll never really be a main slot consideration. Now, it is decent modifier damage for high crit slash units, because obviously you have to be a slash-oriented unit. We'll talk about that again in a second. So you do get that 42 mod. The crit damage, though, is very important that you have to actually land a critical hit to realize the upside of that. So on a main slot here, 67 extra modifier on a crit hit, actually pretty good. In the sub slot, that drops down to 33. That's still okay, I guess. But you really are handcuffed by the fact that it's slash attack oriented, meaning non-slash units basically lose a whole bunch of the upside of this card. Now, the bestowed effects that we saw of the 5 unit res and the 15 accuracy, they're okay, but it's really only in the main slot where you get the full benefits of them, so I don't consider that a real consideration for when you do put it in the sub slot. And I don't really see much good overlap with the strike units where Fist is on this card, right? Particularly as a main vision card, because when you put in the sub slot, you only get the crit damage and the reaction block, which strike units already have a fair amount of vision cards that do that for them. And so while maybe this opens some doors with some other classes that they don't normally have, from like a fist perspective, this doesn't really add anything that they don't already have. So out of the 3 jobs that this comes for, one of them really doesn't need this. But let's look at that slash attack orientation in terms of like characters that genuinely will use that effect. I've circled some of them, let's say more noteworthy ones. Obviously there's other ones on here that it applies for, but in terms of like characters that I still see used relatively commonly across, say top 50 in auto PvP, you know what, there actually are some really good slash oriented units here. Astrius obviously comes to mind. Bradley does too. Wing Stern certainly does. There's some step down tier units, we'll say like in Squall and Knight of Ruin Stern, but A2 is on this card, who's everyone is very much looking forward to and seems to be getting some good traction. You have 2 different tank options here with Rain and Joom. You have some good cost limit options here with the Winter Revies as well as Bromwell. So from a slash attack orientation, although that's a downside, there actually are some noteworthy characters here that will get advantage of that. So it's all it's not lost in that perspective. But again, let's kind of consider taking Fist out for a second. Let's look at these, the overlap between Grtswrd and Sword Knight. Now, there's only 2 vision cards in the entire game where they overlap, and it's this one and the Love for Hiryu, which is not a good thing, because when you talk about, all right, let me like combine these 2 classes, it's really not there in order to do so. These 2 vision cards don't do nearly enough to incentivize any kind of crossover between Grtswords and Sword Knights. There's more than enough characters here, which are individually good characters, but in combining those 2 for any kind of rainbow party, really not there whatsoever. If anything, and we're going to leave Grtswrd out of this for a moment, and I think everyone's looking at this from the Grtswrd perspective because it's kind of considered, Astrius's vision card, if you will. If you look at the Sword Knight, this actually is a very interesting addition to what they have, though, because there are 2 future vision cards here that really are amping up for what Sword Knight can do in terms of mono teams. And if I'm like kind of theory crafting a team here of, let's say, mono Sword Knight, Again, that might be relatively unbalanced. You might have to still sub-slot in a support of some kind, but the Melnia Vision card opens a lot of doors here for what else you can put in this main slot, and that's the unit res and the agility percent. You are kind of overlapping on the reaction block right here, though. You would have to theoretically use a different AoE vision card here, the Holiday Party or Death Machine, considering it's a Rainbow Party to get your AoE res. But you still have some alternatives you could flip-flop back and forth with, where the future Ashen Lucio vision card has unit res on it, so you could flip that with Melnia. You could do the same thing here with the Halloween Lucio vision card, which has your agility, so you could almost flip-flop these top and two bottom ones. But you can also kind of flip-flop the Heindler Dragon Vision card with the Full Metal card, where they both affect offenses in two different ways, but the Full Metal card's actually better theoretically because it affects a larger variety of physical damage dealing units, where if you are trying to put fist units into this Sword Knight class, they're going to benefit more from that. But even then, when you consider all the different potential cards you could weave in here for the offensive output, you still have regular Ifrit, which is the attack percent, Aegeon for slash attack. The Hiryu card, we just mentioned, does have physical man killer on it. The new 2P card that's coming in the future, this bottom left one, is attack percent. So even in terms of like specialness, if you were to look at it from the Sword Knight lens, from the Heindler Dragon perspective, this vision card's not all that special. I think there's really a lot of other alternatives that you could still put in here to get the reaction block rate, to get the crit damage, to get the modifier, whether it's human killer on physical attack, whether it's other kinds of slash attack here with the future Ashen Warrior card, whether it's extra crit damage modifier, which is here in some of the other vision cards. So yeah, not that special even from the Sword Knight perspective, which I think might be its strongest angle at this point. And so the considerations to pull is if you badly need the Esper. That to me is the only reason why you should pull this right now. Again, it's permanent pool, and there's other offensive oriented alternatives as we just kind of walked through from the vision card perspective, that the Esper is really the only good thing about this pull. This vision card is very much one that is kind of mundane. We're obviously in a very harsh magic meta at the moment, and so if you're still struggling to beat those teams, sure, this Esper actually genuinely could turn the tide for you in making one of those units disproportionately much more of a anti-magic unit. But even then, it's the permanent pool argument is a hard one to justify, considering all the good limited stuff we have coming. So to me, I'm a little lackluster on this release, which I think for good reason. It's still like a very, very high quality Esper. It's still a vision card that I'll probably use at some point in the future whenever I happen to pull it for some of these slash attack teams. But it's not something I'm really foot on the pedal for at the moment to make sure I get ASAP. But that's it for now. Hopefully that was informative and insightful, and I'll talk to y'all soon.